Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to have a bit of a discussion today, and this discussion is going to center around 1.x units and the buffs that they need to really be competitive members of the roster. And one thing about 1.x units is that it's pretty clear that they felt a little bit abandoned. They felt a little bit neglected ever since version 2.0, where things like Nightmare Echo, stuff like that got released. And honestly, it seems from all of the rerun data that we've seen that Kuro might have just given up on them. But this is going to be one of my last ditch attempts, one of my last efforts over here to try to get some attention on, in my opinion, some of the coolest members of the roster that, let's just be real here, they haven't rerun in a whole goddamn year. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have the Yinlin banner schedule showing up over here, and her last rerun was in version 2.3. We've got the Jiyan banner schedule showing up over here, and you can probably imagine 2.3 was also the last time that he reran. And then when it comes to Jinhsi, also 2.3. Camellya, on the other hand, only had 2 reruns, one in 2.2, and then she hasn't seen a banner since. Same with Changli, though. 2.3 was her last rerun. Zhezhi, also 2.3, and then Zhang Liao, 2.3 over here. And so what's become abundantly clear is that these units have something wrong with them, at least in terms of like balancing, at least in terms of like overall performance. They and their weapons have not been available since the anniversary last year, and for some characters like Camellya, well, a little bit longer than that, the version right before the anniversary. And so this presentation that I've cooked up over here takes a deep examination of all of these different characters' kits, all of the 1.x units, and then from there provides suggestions and solutions to get them up to parity with some of the existing members of the roster, and of course, give them a lot more viability as a potential pull for any new player's account. Because right now, guys, it's become kind of obvious. Nobody's had the chance to pull them ever since that anniversary, and there's been plenty of new players that have joined during that time. These kind of just seem like artifacts. They kind of just seem like relics. So let's go ahead. Let's start breaking it down. So, of course, these are going to be the rejects of society, the rejects of the Wuthering Waves game, and we're actually going in order of overall priority, with the characters that I think have the most problems up front, and the characters that have, I think, the least amount of issues over at the bottom. So do keep this in mind. This is like the list: Yinlin, Zhang Liao, Jinhsi, Zhezhi, Jiyan, Changli, and then Camellya over at the bottom. So without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's get ourselves started off with good old Yinlin over here. So this is a summary of the changes that I think she should have. The first one being increasing her concerto generation so she has a faster rotation, increasing her overall damage multipliers because they're kind of just pathetic, increasing the uptime of her coordinated attacks, and also improving her ability to buff teammates' damage with that amplifying ability down there. So first things first, concerto generation. Add a 15 concerto energy bonus to the second cast of her resonance skill, probably somewhere in her inherent ability. Basically, using lightning execution, that second cast should give her 15 extra concerto. The idea over here is that her rotation, even if you use her forte, can feel like it takes an extraordinarily long time for no goddamn reason. And putting a cooldown of 20 seconds onto it does kind of like promote general rotational gameplay, and it'll speed up rotations and basically minimize the need to quick swap on her to feel like she has a functional kit. She is like a sub DPS unit where it feels like you need a quick swap in the middle of her fucking rotation. Otherwise, she just like doesn't rotate properly. And the level of clunk that she has in her trunk when it comes to getting full forte, getting full concerto, is kind of just ridiculous, and it feels like no other sub DPS in the game has these issues. Now, next up, damage multipliers. Boy, oh boy. Yinlin's Liberation has, this is only level 9, but you can already see that the scaling is fucking shit. It has some of the most insanely low damage multipliers I've ever seen in the fucking game. And it's also the same with her Forte Heavy attack. This is at level 10, and using this big attack, this big move, right, where she like sits down and stuff like that, and then like brings all the lightning, bro, it deals less than 400% damage. These are like the cornerstone moves in her kit, and they barely add up to like 1,200%. I'll just go ahead and show you one ability from another sub DPS that already exceeds the damage of these two. If I just go ahead and I go on over to like a Chakota, right? You can see that her initial liberation cast deals 1,100%. It's just more. There's just way more damage being brought out by virtually every other sub DPS in the game. And what Yinlin has in comparison is kind of just pathetic. And so her personal damage rate is like, you know, is not really at the levels of like any other goddamn character. And she is in competition with Zhezhi for some of the lowest overall damage in the game. However, this doesn't apply to her coordinated attacks. And the reason why we're not asking for a buff to her coordinated attack damage over here is going to be pretty simple. I'll cover it on the next slide. Now we're talking about coordinated attacks. So basically, instead of having Judgment Strike activate when the target marked by her forte takes damage, Yinlin should instead just hit every target once a second without that need to deal damage to them. This should improve her AoE a lot, or this should improve her AoE damage ability a lot. And if there's ever a moment in a rotation, right, where you're not able to hit a target, Yinlin's forte attack coordinated attacks just don't fucking disappear, because that is one of the conditions that you need to trigger it up to 1 time a second. You need to deal damage, and then she follows up with an attack afterwards. Just have the damage occur without the need to damage the opponent to trigger it. Second, she should transfer her punishment marks when enemies die. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, she has to cast her forte to mark enemies, and then once the enemies die, it's over. The forte attacks will not happen anymore. And this usually isn't really an issue in single target like you might find in the TOA, but it is a massive issue in game modes like Whimpering Waste, AoE content, where the enemies are, you know, dying relatively fast. Her coordinated attacks basically don't exist, and it is a massive loss to her DPS. And so I'm basically just saying over here, hey, transfer them like how Chisa is able to transfer them, where when an enemy that's affected by, or an ally that's affected by Chisa's outro defeats an enemy that's marked, the next time they damage an enemy, she'll transfer the mark over to them. And that's how she keeps up her Havoc Bane application. Just asking for the same thing over here for Yinlin's marks. And that should hopefully help out a lot more. I think Mornier has a similar transferring mechanic too. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's all of these characters, the modern ones, right, that are marking enemies, well, they just go ahead and they transfer their marks when the enemies die, something that Yinlin should very likely have as well. Now, a bit of a bonus. Add a bit of a CC effect to enemies when she uses Camellya and Cypher. That's the big move over here where she sits down and then summons the lightning and then marks enemies. Have it have a CC effect like how Carlotta's Forte Heavy Attack freezes enemies too while the attack is occurring. This will basically just make it so she doesn't get interrupted during the cast of this ability, because that happens like a fucking lot. It happens a ridiculous amount of times. The enemy will just hit her during this, and then sometimes her marks just don't even trigger, and you gotta like restart the run. I'm just gonna be honest over here. It's just Carlotta's heavy attack functions in almost the exact same way, but it's guaranteed to land because she CCs enemies during the animation. Just give Yinlin something like that too, right? It's even thematic too, right? She's shocking them so much that they can't move. It makes sense to me. That is going to be followed by maybe add some type of like vulnerability modifier as well. Make the enemies take like 10% additional damage to targets that are marked by her forte. Something like that. I think that would make sense, especially considering that her current buffing ability, she provides nothing except her outro skill. A sub DPS that provides no literal buffs at all outside of their outro is almost like unheard of in this game. And so giving targets marked by her forte a bit of a damage increase, taken something like that, I think thematically makes a little bit of sense, because like, what's the move called, bro? It's like a punishment mark. So they're feeling punished and they're taking more damage, right? So again, that would be something that I feel like makes sense in the context of her kit. She's like clearly like a little bit like, you know, you guys get it. Don't be weird. But those are my main suggestions for how to fix Yinlin over here, because she has some of the strongest outro buffs in the game. It's just no other damage buffs in her kit. Everything's like personal, and her personal damage is fucking shit, and her rotation feels like shit to use as well. And she has so much room for interruption in her kit. It's kind of ridiculous, and she's useless in AoE content. So those are the changes over there. Hopefully, those make sense. Now let's go ahead, oh my god, and move on to Zhang Liao. And Zhang Liao's mainly going to focus on these updates. Increase his damage multipliers as well as his damage typing, and have better Sonata set activation conditions, or just give him a better Sonata set overall. So first things first, damage multipliers. Convert all of his liberation mode attacks to liberation damage. You can see over here, right? He's got like pivot, impale, and all of this shit. That all deals basic attack damage. Literally, it deals basic attack damage. And guess what his resonance skill deals as well in that mode? Resonance skill damage. Just convert everything when he reconfigurates while he's in intuition. Just convert it all to liberation damage so he actually scales a lot better. Because there's not really a reason right now for this to deal basic attack. There's not really a reason for this to deal resonance skill damage, but they both do. And the only thing that really gets buffed to liberation damage, guys, is his dodge counter. Which is like, what the fuck? Like, why that move? Anyways, we also want to give a little bit of a buff to Law of Rains. Yes, that hypercube damage. Because right now, it's all right, but it feels like it should be more, considering the fact that this is kind of like all he does in his rotation. He liberates, and then he launches the 3 hypercubes, and the rest of the damage that he does is not really feeling that consequential. It's not really feeling that good. Maybe like having this over here increase to like 300%, or maybe something along those lines, along with the changes to the rest of his damage typing, I feel like would be enough to get him over the kind of hump he is right now. Because if we actually just take a look at some of the 1.x teams, I'm just going to be entirely real with you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my god, get the fuck out of here. Let me show you some of the 1.x teams that exist in this game, and it's going to kind of blow your mind. So, this is a premium team with 3 limited 5-star units. Let me show you a team that does more damage. Literally, it does more damage. Jiyan's team with the Mortefi does more damage than this one. Jiyan's team does more damage, and Mortefi is a 4-star unit. That's kind of a fucking disaster, right? Just balance-wise, value-wise, all of that. Even with Yinlin on String Master and and Zhang Liao on his Sig, Mortefi on Static Mist is just gonna deal more. It's higher damage. The calculations have been done. And so kind of like the end result is, clearly, there's a massive amount of under-tuning over here. We've addressed how to get Yinlin's tuning back up. And Zhang Liao over here, I think he just needs more motion values on top of everything that you're seeing over here. Next, his inherent skill. Bro, this thing is so ridiculous to use, it's crazy. So basically, he gains a 5% electro damage bonus after using a resonance skill for 8 seconds that's stackable up to 4 times. Bro, just buff it so it gives 20% electro damage after using a skill. Like, he is already on the lower end of performers when it comes to damage on the roster. Does he need to have a restriction like this where like you're incentivized to do like these mini quick swaps in his fucking rotation to like build this shit up? No, like it's just, no, it doesn't need to be this difficult. It doesn't need to be this clunky. And most of the times you don't even think about this effect because it stacks up so slowly and requires so much sweatiness to even get to a level where it feels like it's significant. Just give him 20% after using his skill. I don't think anyone really needs to worry too much about this one. And next, his Sonata set. Void Thunder is Zhang Liao's best in class Sonata set, and it operates in this way. It has 2 stacks of 15% electro damage. One from using a skill, which is easy to activate, lasts for 15 seconds, and then one from using a heavy attack, which is annoying as fuck to activate. And so a lot of people in the present day still don't believe me when I tell them that this is how it works. So we're just gonna go ahead, go over to the attribute menu and show you firsthand just how shit this thing is. You can see it has 94% at a baseline, right? I use my skill. Now he's at 114%. That's 5% coming from his inherent that we just looked at, and then another 15%, right, coming from the activation of Void Thunder. If Void Thunder worked in a way where using 2 skills would max this out, you would then see this jump up to like 130 something on the next skill cast. Are you ready? The only bonus we're going to be getting is 5%. And the reason for that is simple, ladies and gentlemen, because we're just getting the bonus from his inherent skill, and Void Thunder's stacks are independent. You want to know how we get the other 15% and get this all the way up to 134%? I'll show you. We gotta use his fucking heavy attack. And after that's done, boom, now we have the full Void Thunder bonus. So basically, Zhang Liao's tech is to like intro skill in off of like Yinlin or something, and then go. It's so clunky, it's crazy. Adds like an additional second onto his rotation, obviously eats into his DPS, and that's all just for 50% electro damage, but you kind of want that in your rotation, right? It's just a poorly designed set, because he doesn't use heavy attacks at all in his rotation. He just doesn't fucking use them at all. It's all this extra clunk just to activate his baseline Sonata set effect, and it's fucking annoying. I think everyone can tell it's just fucking annoying. It feels like it shouldn't be there in the game, but guess what? Void Thunder is his best set. And when you have sets like Molten Rift, where they just give you the full damage bonus for just using a resonant skill, isn't that just, this is just objectively fucking worse. It's just objectively goddamn worse when you just get the full 30% from using a skill here, but you get only 15% and it's two different stacks and it comes from two different sources with Void Thunder. That's just the reality of it. It's just a underpowered dog shit Sonata set compared to pretty much every other one in the game. So basically it's just like, yo, can you guys just, like, buff this shit so that, like, I don't know, make Zhang Li's intro skill count as a heavy attack? I don't know. Or just buff Void Thunder so it's similar to Molten Rift? Or, like, change the heavy attack requirement to an intro skill or something? I don't know, bro. But surely there's gonna be some sort of way to just make this not feel like shit to use. Because right now, you're just, like, jumping through hoops to activate its buff, and it feels dumb as hell. And that's gonna be the ask over here. Moving on, we got Jinhsi. And Jinhsi's gonna have some of the widest sweeping, biggest sort of buffs because she's a sentinel unit and she doesn't feel like one. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, sentinel units in this game are supposed to feel a little bit overpowered. That's kind of like how the pathing has worked out for them, because we've got Amith over here who feels a little bit overpowered, and then we have Cardathea as well, who also on release felt a little bit overpowered. And the reality is that Jinhsi doesn't even come anywhere close when it comes to a comparison. And the end result, guys, is that, well, she just feels a little bit weaker. Not a little bit weaker, a lot weaker. And she's also received no fucking support at all over the release of her entire fucking kit. Yeah, no support other than Zhezhi in 1.2 because Camellya doesn't really count. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on over here. Convert more of her damage to resonant skill, buff her 4-cost echo, and give her an actual sub DPS that isn't somebody's sloppy seconds. Because guess what? Her best in slot is Zhezhi, but Zhezhi's better with Carlotta than with her. So it's kind of just like, why does she even exist on the roster at this point? Is a question many people are asking. Now, so first and foremost, with the conversion, convert her damage to resonant skill damage on her liberation. Her liberation actually deals a lot of fucking damage. And so you can maybe slightly decrease the motion values on it if needed. Also, decrease her resonance cost. Bro, this thing costs 150. Basically, every other DPS in the game, we got Camellya's liberation down here, costs less. Why is hers the one that costs 150 when I don't think there's any other character in the game that needs that much? Basically, this forces her to rely on Zhezhi to cast this ability every rotation because otherwise the cost is too fucking high. It's just too goddamn high. Even with 120 ER, you want Zhezhi on the team as well. That is a ridiculous requirement, and this is one of the reasons for why you don't even want to use her with Camellya, even though Camellya is a possible choice. Because you need Jinhsi on like 130% ER to cast with Camellya because of how expensive this shit is. This should go down to 125, be resonant skill damage, and probably also reduce a little bit of the motion value to balance it out a little bit. This would be a massive change that would make her a lot stronger and a lot easier to build and free up a lot of her team comps too. So that's something to think about. Next, her 4-cost Echo. So basically, her 4-cost Echo's buffs come from Jiyan. Jiyan is a piece of shit. Jiyan has gotten power creds by other 4-cost Echoes because all Jiyan gives is 16% resonant skill damage on activation for 15 seconds. Other Nightmare Echoes that 1.x units are using, bro, they give 12% attribute and 12% damage type. With Crownless over here, right? Nightmare Crownless, 12% Havoc, 12% Basic. Passively. So she got to activate this. It only lasts for 15 seconds. This is passive and you don't have to activate it. So yeah, just make a Nightmare Jiyan that gives 12% Spectral and 12% Resident Skill. Or another Nightmare Echo on the Celestial Light set that does the same fucking thing. It doesn't have to be Jiyan. Bro, this thing is fucking cheeks. This thing is buns, bro. You know it's not good. You know this shit is bad. Let's just be real here. This is not very good at all. And it's unfortunately what she has to roll with. It is what it is. That's the Sentinel Echo. It's the worst Sentinel Echo in the fucking game. Sucks. I know. Next. A real sub DPS for her. 50% resonance skill amplification. This is what we need a new character for. Basically, just make it the same type of goddamn outro skill that you're seeing up here from a Yuno, where she gets 50% heavy attack, or a Chuyan, where he gets 50% echo skill. So yes, a 50% resonance skill damage amplifier, similar to Yuno or Chuyan, with non-spectro coordinated attacks in their kit. Jinhsi, because of her massive ER costs, relies on Zhezhi. Zhezhi's just better with Carlotta. This character, functionally, has no use cases on anybody's account because you can't really use Cantarella with her because her ER costs are so fucking high at 150 on her Liberation. And so you just don't get her Liberation if you use Cantarella. Every other rotation, and it also fucks up her Concerto generation. The end result, guys, is that, like, Jinhsi is currently one of just the worst units in the game because every teammate that you would use with her is, like, better in somebody else's hands. And that's just rough. And so having, right, a 50% resonance skill amplifier that has coordinated attacks, all of that, but maybe less buffing ability like Zhezhi, you fix Jinhsi's ER cost too. Well, now you've separated her from Zhezhi and she can now actually build out her own teams. Awesome. Now we got the next sort of conclusion over here for Jinhsi. With all of these changes, Jinhsi would probably be a little bit overtuned. I'll be the first one to tell you that. But she's a Sentinel Resonator and is currently actually one of the worst units in the game. I think that pulling her will legitimately just make it a net loss for your account because, like I said before, anyone that you would use with her is better with somebody else. And that's just the unfortunate reality over here. And she is currently lore unfriendly by being so fucking weak. Now, moving forward, we got our next unit. We got Zhezhi. Zhezhi isn't really going to have that many changes suggested over here. Her section is going to be fast because she's still a viable character with Carlotta. So, with all these changes, right? Increase AoE of coordinated attacks, increase some of her damage multipliers, and she is still viable, so that's why there's not going to be that many. So basically, her Inklet spirits on her Resonance Liberation have no AoE at all. They're entirely single target. She has like 21 of them that she sends out over a period of time. Or over 30 seconds. The end result is that in Whimpering Wastes, bro, she might be the worst sub DPS I've ever fucking seen in the game mode. Yes, Yinlin doesn't have the ability to transfer marks. Bro, she hits one of like the 30 enemies on the screen at a time with these. It's just pathetic. And like they should detonate, explode when they land, and like actually hit more than one thing at a time. Second, bro, these things have no AoE and they also deal no fucking damage. It's actually pathetic to the point where Zhezhi's damage in teams isn't really factored in at all. And it's like in the Carlotta Zhezhi team, Carlotta's dealing like a huge fucking majority of it. Because this unit over here, guys, quite possibly has the lowest personal damage in the game. I think it's actually worse than Yinlin's. And you combine that with the fact that her Liberation deals no damage on cast. It just summons the spirits and then they just go out. You see there's no other motion value on the ability because it doesn't even do anything initially when you cast it. So shouldn't these at a bare minimum just be doing like more damage? She kind of just only buffs. That's kind of like it. You don't factor in any of her other abilities. And for a sub DPS in the modern day and age, having no personal damage does feel pretty goddamn bad. And this over here, bro, this is lower than Yinlin's coordinated attack. She deals less damage than Yinlin's coordinated attacks. And that's on Yinlin's forte. So yeah, that is basically the stuff with Zhezhi. And also, give her a rework on her S2. Bro, she summons 6 more of these. That is her S2. She summons 6 more of these spirits that deal no damage. What the fuck? So maybe give it a buff where she like adds 40% glacial damage to the entire team, like how other sub DPSs have that as well. Rosia has it, Chakota has it, Lupa has it. Maybe Zhezhi should have it as well, because 6 more of these is crazy. This is the biggest scam I think I've ever seen in the history of the game. 6 more of these. Are you for real, bro? There's no way. Yeah, this shit cannot be taken seriously, man. It literally cannot be taken seriously. It's not a real sequence node. It's the fakest what I've ever seen in the game. Now, we got Jiyan. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the section of the video that everybody has been waiting for. We've got Jiyan. So a summary of his changes are: adjust his liberation to consume forte on attack instead of just having a 10-second duration. Basically, make it operate similar to Zani. Second, give his liberation 2 casts, and we'll cover that in depth later. And then also convert his enhanced resonance skill damage to heavy attack damage, so it's not a DPS loss to use it in the rotation. Now, first and foremost, change his liberation to function similar to Zani's. Yes, you see that bar over there? This means that he has a full resource bar when he casts, and each attack that hits consumes some of the forte instead of it just having a 10-second duration that you're seeing over here. Second, increase the motion values of stage 2 and 3 over here, and dodging will no longer reset the attack chain. So he just goes from Qinglong stage 1 to 2 to 3. This basically makes it so that if the enemy dodges, if the enemy gets away from him, blah, 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 he doesn't just have all of his DPS thrown out the fucking window. This also makes it so that you can still dodge cancel his attacks and stuff like that, but you'll actually get to see his other animations too in the process. Basically just making it so that his gameplay isn't just like basic attack 1 spamming into dodges. You can still do that, but you'll actually see the rest of his attack chain, and of course, it should feel overall more satisfying to use. Next, change his liberation to make it 2 casts, because he's got this animation over here for when he uses his liberation at 0 forte. If you ever see this in-game, you're griefing. Make it operate this way. The first cast of his liberation uses this animation, and then the second is available after consuming all of the forte over here through his attacks. And so he basically will start off with this one and then throw his spear and do, you know, this attack over here, Emerald Storm Finale, at the end of his rotation, which makes a lot more sense because the move is called Finale, but he uses it at the start of his rotation currently, and you never, ever see this animation over here if you're trying to play him somewhat optimally. It just makes a lot more sense, and basically, this would make it function similarly to a Cardathea, where she, you know, brings down the sword and does all of that. And of course, similar to a Zani as well, where she does that final attack where she kind of like jumps on the clock and then like strikes down. That's kind of what it is. You see this animation? He does all of his forte attacks, and then he ends with this final attack over here. And that would just make, well, the work that Kuro's already done actually result in something versus like the weird amalgamation of bullshit that we have right now. So that's looking pretty good. Next, he has an enhanced resonance skill that, well, if he consumes some of his forte to cast it, or he uses it during Qinglong mode, it deals a little bit of extra damage. Just convert this enhanced resonance skill to deal heavy attack damage, because right now you just use the ability for energy regeneration, and it's actually a DPS loss currently. Because, yeah, if he's using an enhanced version of it, it should deal his damage type so that you're incentivized to actually use it. This would make his S1 also not a piece of shit too in the process. that's going to be it for the Jiyan changes. I know it's a lot shorter than you guys expected, but his kit is actually, well, one of the best aged across all of the 1.x characters. There's a reason why we're not spending that much on him. Now we got Changli, and her buffs are very simple. Buff her outro skill to 14 seconds, buff Inflame and Stack Generation, buff her forte attack motion values, and rework some of her dog shit sequence nodes. So first and foremost, she has the worst outro skill in the game, because it has this one weakness. It lasts for 10 seconds. There's no universe where she should have a 10-second outro skill as a 5-star limited character. This is fucking embarrassing, and this is also giga fucking bad. Second, when you compare it to other outro skills in the game like Brandt's, well, Brandt just does more damage than her, has like more utility in his kit, and also has a longer outro skill. She just feels straight up worse in comparison, and it's kind of just rough that she has a restriction like this. So, yeah, it's just not necessary for this to be 10 seconds. It should be 14, like pretty much every other 5-star character. Next, Forte, Inflamement. Give her 1 stack when she uses an intro skill. Changli effectively gets like a stack right now because she gains True Sight. Just have her gain 1 stack of her Forte as well as True Sight when she uses her intro skill. And that would basically make it so that her new rotation becomes intro in, have 1 stack, do her True Sight attack for the 2nd stack, then skill, another True Sight attack for her 3rd, and then skill again, followed by another True Sight attack for her 4th. Then she just does her Forte heavy, her Liberation, and then her 2nd Forte heavy. And that would just make it so that she has no more need to do her clunky ass basic attack chain to gain one of her stacks. Because that's kind of just the reality of the unit right now. You would still be able to do it to like generate more stacks and like quick swap and stuff like that. But this would just simplify her playstyle, make it a shorter rotation that technically deals less damage because you're not doing the basic attack chain. But guess what? It would speed up her rotation a lot too and just make her feel like more of like a sub DPS sort of character in all of her teams, which I think is a good vision for her because her basic attack chain, well, think about when you're using basic attack chains on certain characters. Some of them you just don't even do them at all. So yeah, that would be my suggestion over here for her Forte stack generation. Next, her heavy attack. Bro, this thing does no fucking damage. We can surely buff the motion value over here on this attack to at least be like 600%. Or something like that. 457.85 is just, it's just depressingly low. Let's just be real here. It's kind of just depressingly low, and it hasn't really aged well at all. And by buffing the motion value on this attack, it also buffs her Liberation too, since her Liberation lets her cast this immediately. So yeah, it's just an overall damage buff to her entire portfolio, which makes sense given that she has kind of fallen behind in that department. And lastly, her S1 and S2, bro, her S1 is the most pathetic shit I've ever seen. It's like this tiny ass 10% damage dealt that's like, it's basically like having 10% fusion damage on like 2 attacks. That is her S1. Gain 10% fusion damage on like 2 attacks. And then also interruption resistance. That is the most dog shit sequence node I think I've seen in the fucking game. So yeah, maybe buff it to like 25% or higher and also have it affect all of her true side attacks. And for her S2, buff it to like 35% crit rate because 25 is pathetic given that it's not really buffing any of your other damage elsewhere. And then cause it to make overcapping crit rate convert into crit damage at a 1-to-2 ratio. Basically making it so that you no longer need to swap your forecast over to crit damage, and it's just an unnecessary thing in her kit, especially when you have, well, sequence nodes like Augusta's in the game, right? Where Augusta makes it so you don't have to switch your echo. She just converts and stuff like that. This is basically just taking inspiration from Augusta's S2. Obviously, it's weaker because Augusta gains 40%. This one would only give you 35, but it's kind of like fair since Changli's a sub DPS, right? She's not really meant to be out here dealing a shit ton of damage. So that's my suggestion for her sequence nodes because Changli easily has the worst ones in the goddamn game, and it's kind of absurdly ridiculous how bad they are. Now, Camellya. And this is going to be our last unit, ladies and gentlemen. Her goals over here are going to be shorten her rotation, but keep her overall damage the same, increasing her DPS. Have an outro buff that fits into her whole rotation, because right now it doesn't. And third, convert her liberation damage to basic attack damage. Kind of short over here. So the first one's basically going to focus on how, well, to build up her Crimson Pistols, right? Consume them, gain her buds, and cast Ephemeral. She's got to do a lot more than just one full spin attack. And my suggested change basically is doing one of these spin attacks, the whole thing, right, should just consume all of her forte and allow her to enter budding form, allow her to cast ephemeral, all of that stuff. And the goal is to have it be about 6 seconds on average in both forms so that it all fits into a single outro skill by a Sanhua, Rosia, so on and so forth. Because right now, Ultra Bus will run out like 3/4 of the way through her rotation, and it just feels really weird that she's this character that has so much like buff fall off, right, in comparison to other units. Yes, you can do like double intros and stuff to like work around that, but still that just means that part of your rotation is going to be unbuffed. And I think it is just kind of like, she just feels outdated from that degree because there's not really any other character in the game that has this kind of like fucked up restriction like her. So yeah, that's going to be the take over here. Next, just change your Resonance Liberation damage type to basic attack damage. This ability out here doesn't really even deal a ridiculous amount of damage in the first place, and it would be helpful to actually activate it and, well, have it deal more than like 100k. Have it deal more than like 110k if we're going to be real over here. That's going to be the Camellya changes, because I'm going to be honest, she doesn't personally need that much, but she's also going to benefit a lot from something else that's probably going to be added to the game in the future. And that's going to be her having an actual sub DPS. Rosia is a steaming pile of shit. Everyone knows that. Rosia is probably the worst 2.x character on the roster. Probably tied with like Zhezhi and Phoebe if we're going to be honest. So Rosia could just get a buff as well. Or there's a new 50% basic attack amplifier like Chuyan or Yuno. We've already covered this before in the Jinhsi section. Like Chuyan or Yuno, that could probably just take on this role too. So yeah, I'm pretty sure anyone that comes out with a basic attack supporting kit like this is also going to be very, very, very strong for Camellya as well. Probably designed for Luke Herson, but Camellya is also going to be a second beneficiary of that entire thing. So we'll just have to see. Kuro's already set a pretty strong baseline with outro buffs like this on Chuyan and Yuno, but you can kind of see, damn, only arrow characters are getting the bonus over here. So hopefully that should be landing soon. Another thing to do is, well, just buff Rosia, because she's also a steaming pile of shit like we just talked about. And I think the main buff that Rosia would need is very simple. Just add a 15% crit rate buff, scaling off of Rosia's crit rate, just like her attack one. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proposing that we just add that line to her liberation. A 15% crit rate buff that scales off of this once you reach, I don't know, like 70% or something like that. And then that's just added on top of this bonus over here. That should probably be good, because Chuyan has an easier to activate crit damage buff. That's right here. You only need 65% crit rate on Chuyan, and then he buffs crit damage by 30%. At this point, Rosia is just underpowered, ladies and gentlemen. And this would be one way to kind of like close the gap between her and other sub DPS characters. Because like Linnea's got that 24% all damage bonus. Bro, all she has is 200 attack. That shit is pathetic. You can just add a 15% crit rate buff onto her. And like, I'm going to be real, not much would change. She'd probably be better in the Frolova team too now. Like actually have a use case over there used over other units. Because right now she kind of just doo-doo water. So yeah, that's going to be all of the proposed changes, ladies and gentlemen. That is the last slide over here. And as you can probably see, man, I built a pretty goddamn big old presentation for this one. But I do believe this is sort of like the swan song for those 1.x characters. Because like I said before, and like we've already seen, right? These guys haven't reran since last year. And if we don't really see any sweeping changes to them soon, them being re-added to the banner schedule, stuff like that, we might assume that they're just getting abandoned as a whole. And when other games in the gacha space, right, games like Honkai Star Rail, games like Zenless Zone Zero, so on and so forth, have been at the front and center putting in changes, even Genshin Impact 2, Wuthering Waves is actually like the one game that has not been keeping up with their older units and buffs to their older units. That's just a fact. And it's unfortunate that that's occurred, but one can argue it's not really that big of a deal because they just have refused to rerun these units at all since the anniversary. But when Kuro has a track record of having buffs in their other games like PGR, I mean, I'm just going to be real here. They put a lot of effort into these units. A lot of people really like them. and think they're solid adds to the game, and they want more opportunities to play them, I think it's truly finally time to actually start putting in some real effort into actual kit updates. And by kit updates, I'm not talking about this bullshit that they did in End State Matrix. I'm not talking about this trash over here that they put in as like a substitute for action. Bro, this is all they did. It's like, ooh, deal 25% more damage. Deal 25%. Bro, no, I'm not talking about this shit. I'm talking about actual real kit changes like the ones that we talked about today. And hopefully that'll occur. Hopefully it'll happen sometime soon. And hopefully it'll be in time for the anniversary. Because I'm just praying that that's what's on the docket. And that's why this patch is 6 fucking weeks long. Because there's no content in 3.2. Bro, there's nothing in here. This is possibly the most dead second half I've ever seen in the history of the fucking game. And so we got no content. It's still 3 weeks. Hey, get to work. Do something. Yo, do something. I've given you the blueprints for everything that you need to do. Let's see some actual changes. Let's see these units either, I don't know, put back in the banner schedule or acquirable in some fucking way. Because right now it just looks like they've been abandoned. And there's too much quality over here. Too much good kit design to just leave them abandoned in this state. These are good characters. A lot of people really like them. But it seems like Kuro just doesn't know what to do when it comes to fixing them up. Let me know what you all thought. Peace out.